launch of a new coal mine in Australia has divided the country.
No more coal! No more coal!
We have to take stronger action, civil disobedience.
They are over here pleading with our governments not to build new coal mines. We have a responsibility to them.
Our own government is destroying the Great Barrier Reef.
In 30 years, when we've got raging bushfires, our water's running out, we can't grow crops anymore.
The Great Artesian Basin is the biggest underwater resource in the world. The basin provides the only source of fresh water to much of inland Australia. Underground coal mines rely on water to reduce the risk of fires or explosions by using it to cool the cutting surfaces of mining equipment and prevent coal dust from catching fire.
So we know about water being very precious. The Adani mine would suck up as much water as the rest of the users in the whole catchment, and they don't have to pay as much for it because our state laws are very lax and give a whole lot of freebies to mining companies.
The Great Barrier Reef is the world's largest coral reef system, composed of over 2,900 individual reefs, large enough that it can be seen from outer space. Reefs occupy just 1% of the world's marine environment, but they provide a home to a quarter of all marine species. It believes the annual carbon emissions of this single coal mine would be 3 times the average annual emissions from New Delhi, can potentially threaten thousands of animal species that rely on the reef.
I was willing to be arrested, which I was, because a short-term inconvenience of being arrested and being given a fine is okay with me, because the long-term benefit of stopping this mine from going ahead will be amazing.
Governor Sarah Palin announced the first ever test results showing elevated levels of mercury in Alaska fish.
The report warned that increases in selenium pollution would lead to a total population collapse of sensitive species like the West Slope cutthroat trout.
Radium girls and breaker boys cut down by corporate greed, and in the name of industry, fading sparks and glowing girls lighting up our perfect world.
Hey guys, it's me, Comrade Lavender here, and today I'm back with a new anti-capitalism activism deep dive video, and today I'm going to be doing the pure evil files of the coal industry, a deep dive into this topic. So let's get started into this video. But before we get started, these are my other YouTube videos that are on the screen right now that are related to this topic if you'd like to check them out as well. So let's get started into this video. So yeah. In 2022, the market value of coal mining amounted to approximately over $600 billion. Coal is a combustible black or brownish-black sedimentary rock formed as rock strata called coal seams. Coal is mostly carbon with variable amounts of other elements, chiefly hydrogen, sulfur, oxygen, and nitrogen. Coal is a type of fossil fuel formed when a dead plant matter decays into peat and is converted into coal by the heat and pressure of the deep burial over millions of years. Vast deposits of coal originate in the former wetlands called coal forests that covered much of the Earth's tropical land areas during the late Cretaceous, Pennsylvanian, and Permian times. Many significant coal depositors are younger than this and originate from the Mesozoic and Cretaceous eras. The convection of dead vegetation into coal is called coalification. At various times in the geological past, the Earth had dense forests. In low-lying wetland areas, in these wetlands, the process of coalification began when dead plant matter was protected from biodegradation and oxidation, usually by mud or acidic water, and was converted into peat. This trapped the carbon in immense peat bogs that were eventually deeply buried by sediments. Then, over millions of years, the heat and pressure of this deep burial caused the loss of water, methane, and carbon dioxide and increased the proposition of carbon. Although coal is known most from geological periods, 90% of all coal beds were deposited in the Carboniferous and pre-Min periods, which represent just 2% of the Earth's geological history. This was during the late Paleolithic Ice House, a time of global glaciation. Coal came into wide use in the late 1590s in the United Kingdom after the island nation was widely deforested and a ban was placed on the harvesting of wood so that forests could be solely used by the Royal Navy. Environmental effects. Greenhouse gas capitalism caused climate change pollution crisis. Burning coal emits toxic and carcinogenic substances into our air, water, and land, severely affecting the health of miners, workers, and surrounding communities. The overwhelming majority of scientists say there can be no more coal mines if we're to have any chance of a safe climate and not a climate catastrophe. In Australia, coal's health impacts cost taxpayers an estimated $2.4 billion every year. Worldwide, exposure to air pollution contributed to 4.2 million deaths in 2020. Of these deaths, 80% were attributed to human-induced emissions, of which 35% were directly related to the burning of fossil fuels. Coal combustion plants account for more than half of Americans' electrical power generation. According to Coal's Assault on Human Health, a report by the nonprofit Physicians for Social Responsibility, coal combustion releases mercury, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxides, and other substances known to be human carcinogens and hazardous to human health. Other contaminants are sulfur, nitrogen, chlorine, and fluorine. Because of the enormous amounts of coal burned each year, nearly 900 million tons, all of these pollutants are released in significant quantities. Since 2007, peer-reviewed studies by researchers from more than a dozen universities have concluded that mountaintop removal coal mining contributes to significantly higher rates of birth defects, cancer, cardiovascular, and respiratory diseases among individuals living in the region where it occurs. In 2014, researchers demonstrated that the toxic coal dust from mountaintop removal practices promotes the growth of lung cancer cells in people living nearby in nearby communities. It is the first time a direct link has been established rather than a correlation. Greater exposure to pollution from coal mining activity increases the risk for cancer and other fatal diseases. 60,000 cases of cancer in the Appalachia have been directly linked to mountaintop removal practices. Living in or near heavily mined areas increases the risk of lung cancer and other respiratory diseases. Researchers estimate that the coal mining activities contributed to an additional over 1,000 annual deaths from cardiovascular diseases, with as many as 703 occurring in areas with mountaintop removal. Air pollution is a well-documented risk factor for cardiovascular diseases, strokes, and heart attacks. Over time, breathing particle matter or dust caused largely by blasting of mountaintops can lead to the formation of plaque and inflammation and can increase the risk of high blood pressure and heart attacks. These risks are more common and severe in populations with high rates of diabetes, obesity, and tobacco use and cigarette use. Heart disease is the leading cause of death in the Appalachian coal mining communities. Of the 3,000 plus counties in the U.S., the two largest coal-producing counties in Kentucky, Perry County and Pike County, were among the bottom 10 for life expectancies between 1997 and 2007, according to a 2011 study published in Population Health Metrics. This is what Big Pharma wants. These companies in Big Pharma are working together to keep communities sick so they can make massive amounts of capitalism profits. Surface mining destroys forests and groundwater, leading to flooding and soil erosion. More than 1 million acres of hardwood forests and more than 2,000 miles of streams have already been destroyed by surface coal mining and alpaca. Mountaintop removal mining used widely across southern Alpaca can bury streams with rubble and in turn harm aquatic ecosystems and biodiversity in those areas. To date, the practice has buried more than 2,000 miles of headwater streams and polluted many more. Finally, after coal is mined, it is typically washed with water and chemicals to remove impurities before it's burned. Waterways may also become contaminated due to the storage of post-combustion waste from coal plants, also known as coal ash. There are 584 coal ash storage sites in the United States, and the toxic residues have migrated into the water supplies at a dozen of them. By what comes out of a coal mine, usually highly acidic water containing heavy metals like arsenic, copper, and lead. In 2000, the bottom of Kentucky coal slurry impoundment gave way, contaminating more than 100 miles of rivers and streams with more than 300 million gallons of thick black sludge, 30 times larger than the Exxon Valdez oil spill. In 2014, 39,000 tons of coal ash spilled into the Dan River in North Carolina. 6 years earlier, more than 5 million cubic yards of coal ash spilled into Tennessee's Emory River, one of the country's largest environmental disasters ever of all time. And in 1976, releases from an ash pond to Bow Wow's Lake, North Carolina, permitted by the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, caused massive fish kills and completely eliminated 19 species of fish from the almost 4,000-acre lake. Mountaintop mining causes 50% loss of aquatic biodiversity life. All coal plants rely on water. They function by heating water to create steam, which in turn turbines generating electricity, but the water must come from somewhere, typically a nearby river or lake. Coal plants pump the water directly from a water source, heat it up, then discharge it back. The wastewater is typically hotter by up to 20 through 25 Fahrenheit than the water that receives it, creating thermal pollution that can decrease fertility and increase heart rates in fish populations. A typical once-through system withdraws and discharges between 70 to 180 billion gallons of water per year. Researchers found that the effects of mountaintop coal mining pollution are even more widespread than previously reported. Streams from heavily mined watersheds harbor 40% fewer species than streams with cleaner water. That lost biodiversity includes fish, microinvertebrates such as insects, clams, and crustaceans, algae, fungi, bacteria, unicellular organisms called proteates, and more. In other words, it isn't just the particularly sensitive species that are being affected. Some metals bioaccumulate in the aqua food chain. Additionally, bottom-dwelling organisms can be smothered by iron that settles out of the water. Mercury contamination of fish and subsequent consumption by humans eating those fish is the cause of fish consumption advisories in 40 states for inland waters and advisories for some of saltwater species of fish. People who tend to eat locally grown produce and locally caught fish may also receive higher levels and average exposure to deposition pollutants if they live close to a facility. The concentrated pollutants in coal ash causes life-threatening deformities in fish, amphibians, birds, invertebrates, and other organisms living in or nearby polluted waters. Mining practices such as this are blamed in part for the decline of the population of the Kerblin warbler, a small blue songbird that breeds in the mature forests of the Appalachian Mountains. This migratory bird species has experienced a 70% decline since 1966. The Louisiana water thrush, worm-eating warbler, black and white warbler, and yellow-throated virgo are also being threatened by removal of forest habitat. Some more effects that mining has on animals and wildlife. The pollution that turned Nile crocodiles to rubber in May 2008, rangers at South Africa's Kruger National Park found a devastating sight at the gorge, a ton of dead or dying Nile crocodiles. Over the next few days, more than 30 other dead crocodiles were found with their bodies turned to rubber fat. These corpses had no signs of injuries, and the rangers were utterly baffled as to how this happened and how these resilient creatures could die so suddenly. The rangers started an investigation to find out why so many crocodiles were mysteriously dying in the river. What they found was a truly shocking example of how capitalism has caused terrible effects on the natural world. The investigation into why so many crocodiles died was made into a documentary on National Geographic, I think, called Crocs That Turned to Rubber. When they cut open the dead crocodiles and did a necropsy/autopsy, they realized that the insides were consumed by an orange, really hard, rubbery fat. The crocodilians were unable to move, hunt, or swim. They recognized this as pancreatitis. Catfish feed on the bottom of the river, which led experts to suspect that pollution might be the cause behind the crocodiles' deaths. It is hypothesized that contaminants from coal mining and agriculture contributed to the emergence of the disease. The park team started a massive cleanup operation by taking the 200-kilogram corpses out of the gorge by helicopter and burning them in a fire pit on a bonfire. This prevented other crocodiles from feasting on dead bodies and contracting deadly illness themselves via cannibalism. Another mass die-off claimed the lives of 179 crocodiles next season. No chemical in the water was strong enough to kill the crocodiles, but ecologists found around 1,500 toxins and chemicals in the water, with most of them coming from the unregulated mining and sewage disposal from large industrial plants and factories in nearby towns. These toxins, when combined with the increased silt levels, cause a toxic soup sludge. The catfish feed on the heavily polluted silt, and in turn they are fed upon by the crocodiles, which spread the fatal disease up the food chain. True crime cases related to the subject of coal. From the late 1800s to the early 1900s, child labor in coal mines was highly popular. These children were known as the breaker boys. Victims of capitalism worked long hours in terrible working conditions for very low pay and at a high risk of injury, death, and sickness. The boys, most between the ages of 8 years old and 12 years old, worked 12-hour days for as little as 60 cents per day. Working in these coal mines for these boys was a necessity, since the fathers of these children often did not earn enough money to feed the family. Few outside the mining company knew the horrors of child labor that was going on, and even fewer still cared enough to attempt to change conditions. These attempts were quickly silenced by the powerful, capitalist, billion-dollar coal companies. These miners themselves could do very little for risk of being fired. The breaker boys separated impurities such as slate from the coal and separated coal by size. The breakers in which they worked were not heated, so that in winter it was necessary to wear a coat, hats, and scarves. They could not wear gloves because they relied on touch to differentiate the slate from the coal. There was no ventilation in the breaker, causing copious amounts of coal dust to build up and linger in the air supply. Breathing coal dust gave the child laborers many ailments such as black lung disease, tuberculosis, and bronchitis. The boys spent many hours perched on narrow wooden seats over conveyor belts, picking out pieces of slate and other rock from the coal. Spending long hours in this cramped position contributed to various ailments such as curvature shoulders and spine and stunted growth overall. Earning little pay and working long hours had left them with little food, causing them to be chronically underweight and chronically malnutritious. Also, the long hours created a high accident rate. Many accidents that occurred were injuries to the hands, such as broken fingers. Breaker boys sometimes had their fingers amputated by the rapidly moving conveyor belts. Others lost feet, hands, and arms. The legs as they moved among the machinery and became caught under conveyor belts or in gears. Many were crushed to death. Their bodies retrieved from the gears of the machinery by managers and supervisors only at the end of the working day. Others were caught in the rush of coal and crushed to death or smothered. The Battle of Matewan, also known as the Matewan Massacre, was a shootout in the town of Matewan in Mingo County in the Pocahontas Coalfield Mining District in southern West Virginia. It occurred on May 19, 1920, between local coal miners and their allies and the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. The dead include two brothers of the detective agency's founder and Matewan's mayor, Cabell Tresterman, who supported the Union. At the time, the United Mine Workers of America had just elected John L. Lewis as their president. During this period, mine workers logged hours in unsafe and dismal working conditions while being paid low wages. Adding to the hardship was the use of coal script by the Stone Mountain Coal Company. Because the script could only be used for those goods, the company sold through their company stores. A few months before the battle, Union miners and other parts of the county and country went on strike, receiving a full 27% pay increase for their efforts. Lewis recognized that the area was ripe for change and planned to organize the coal fields of southern Appalachia. The Union set its sights its top organizers, including the famous Mary Harris Mother Jones. Roughly 3,000 men signed the Union's roster in the spring of 1920. They signed their Union cards at the community church, something that they knew could cost them their jobs, and in many cases their homes as well. The coal companies controlled many aspects of the miners' lives. Stone Mountain Coal Corporation fought back against this with massive firings, harassment, and evictions. Employed by the Stone Mountain Coal Company, a contingent of the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency arrived on the morning train to evict families that had been living at the Stone Mountain Coal Camp, just on the outskirts of town. The detectives carried out several evictions before they ate dinner. While the detectives made their way to the train depot, they were intercepted by Matewan Chief of Police Sid Hatfield, who claimed to have arrest warrants from the Mingo County Sheriff. Hatfield, a native of the Tug River Valley, was a supporter of the miners. Attempts to organize the UMWA in southern coalfields of West Virginia. Detective Albert Felts and his brother Lee Felts then proceeded at their own warrant for Sid Hatfield's arrest. Upon inspection, Matewan Mayor Cabell Tresterman claimed it was fraudulent. Unbeknownst to the detectives at the time, they had been surrounded by armed miners who watched intently from windows, doorways, and roofs of the businesses that lined Mate Street. Accounts vary as to who actually fired the first shot, and the ensuing gun battle left 7 detectives and 3 townspeople dead, along with events such as the Ludlow Massacre in Colorado 6 years earlier. Approximately 21 people, including miners' wives and children, were killed, marked as an important turning point into the battle for miners' rights. On July 1st, the miners' union went on another strike, and widespread violence erupted. Railroad cars were blown up, and strikers were beaten and left to die at the side of the road. The trial for the miners who killed the 7 agents started in January 26, 1921, and ended in March 1921, with all defendants being acquitted of all charges. Less than a month later, miners from the state gathered in Charleston. They were even more determined to organize the southern coal fields and begin to march to the Logan County. Thousands of miners joined them along the way, cultivating in what would become known as the Battle of Blair Mountain. Up to 100 people were killed and many more arrested. The Battle of Blair Mountain was the largest labor uprising in the United States history. There is a coal mine fire that has been burning for over 50 years. A century ago, Centrilla, Pennsylvania was a busy small town filled with shops, residents, and a brisk mining business. Coal from local mines fueled its homes and its economy, and its 1,200 residents worked, played, and lived as a tight-knit neighbors. Today couldn't be any more different. The streets are abandoned. Most of the buildings are gone. The formerly busy burg has turned into a ghost town. The cause of something that's still happening beneath its empty city streets. A mine fire that's been burning for over 50 years, resulting in the devastation of a community and the eviction and impoverishment of many of its residents. Coal fires are nothing new, but this town is the United States' worst and one of the history's most devastating. Before the 1962 fire, the town had been a mining center for over a century. Home to a rich deposit of coal, the town was incorporated after mining began in the 1850s, and even though the stock market had crashed and the Great Depression struck a strong blow to the coal industry, it didn't kill the town. It took a tragedy to do that, but it's not entirely clear or sure how the tragedy actually begun. It seems to have started with the landfill in an abandoned mine pit that had been covered and converted into a garbage dump in 1962. Trash was a thorny issue in the town, which was full of unregulated dumps, and the city's council wanted to solve the problem with unwanted odors and rats. In May 1962, the city council proposed cleaning up the local landfill in time for town's Memorial Day festivities. Council methods for cleaning up the dump was to set it on fire. Though competing theories exist about how the fire was actually sparked, it is thought that the town's dump fire sparked a much larger mine fire beneath the town. Soon a fire was raging in a coal seam beneath the town. It spread to mine tunnels beneath the town streets, and the local mines closed due to unsafe carbon monoxide levels. Multiple attempts were made to extinguish the fire and put it out, but all of them failed. The reason, ironically, is the aftermath of the mining that defined the town for all those years. There are so many abandoned mine tunnels in the area that one, many, or all could be fueling the fire, and it would be prohibitively expensive and likely impossible to figure out which ones stoked the fire and to close off every single one of them. As the years went on, the ground beneath the city became hotter and hotter, reaching over 900 degrees Fahrenheit in some locations. Smoke poured from the sinkholes and gas-filled basements. Residents started to report health problems and homes began to tilt. Even the dead could not rest in peace. For people in 1981 graves in a town, 2 cemeteries are believed to have dropped into the abyss of the fire that rages below them. Earlier that year, a 12-year-old boy fell into a sudden sinkhole created by the fire, barely escaping with his life and barely escaping death. After that, rather than put out the fire, Congress decided to buy out its residents, paying them to move and get out of that city. Here are some more true crime cases revolved around coal mines and the concept as coal as a whole. Former German Nazi concentration camp, a subcamp located in the village of Schauwitz. The prisoners held there worked in 2 mine shafts of the brownish-black coal mine. The camp began functioning in mid-August 1942. This is the first time in history of the German concentration camps that prisoners were employed below ground. In terms of the number of prisoners, it was one of the largest Auschwitz subcamps. In June 1944, it held about 2,500 prisoners, mostly Jews from Poland, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, Italy, and Hungary. There were also Poles, Russians, Germans in the subcamp. Despite the expansion of the subcamp, the prisoner rooms were way overcrowded in 1944 with more than 200 men and rooms designed for only 54. Thanks to their everyday showers and changing of clothes, dictated by the nature of the work in the mine, they did not suffer from the lice that were a serious problem for the prisoners in other parts of the Auschwitz complex. The work in the mine exhausted them. However, they loaded carts with coal, transported them, made repairs, did construction work in a 3-shift system with quotas they were sometimes unable to fulfill because they were hungry, weak, or starving, or did not know how to do the job. On such occasions, their shift was extended until the norms were met. Prisoners also worked above ground at various sorts of construction jobs. In the second half of 1944, several score underage Jewish prisoners were assigned to sort the coal. SS doctors held selections every few weeks, after which of the prisoners classified unfit for labor were taken to Auschwitz camp. Most of them were murdered in the gas chambers there. According to partially extant records from October 1942 to December 1944, at least 1,800 sick prisoners were removed from there. Soviet soldiers liberated the majority of them on January 29th. After liberation, they were taken to the care of the local branch of the Polish Red Cross. West Papua Indigenous Genocide in Indonesia. Many private companies and government companies want to establish mining sites. It is worth also mentioning that Indonesia is currently one of the largest exporters of coal in the coal industry. There are also several sites and mining companies situated in the areas across Indonesia. A huge and poorly regulated coal industry has generated enormous amounts of wealth for capitalist pig investors, but left local people behind to deal with the impacts of environmental degradation. In West Papua Province, attention has focused on Biduni Bay, believed to hold the province's best and largest coal deposits. Since 2009, 25 companies have received permits to explore for coal in the district, according to data from the government of West Papua Province. Meanwhile, the South Tribe, traditional owners of the land for which PTHIM was given an exploratory permit, are among the country's poorest and most marginalized group of people, and they say they have been given little information on the negative impacts coal mining could have on their communities. Coal mining projects endanger Indigenous women and girls. #Missing Murdered Indigenous Women. Indigenous Aboriginal women and girls face disproportionately high rates of violence, assault, and murder in Australia, Canada, the US, Africa, South America, etc. This has been a long-standing and severe issue that has led to the National Enquirer into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The inquiry most notably highlights the danger that resource extraction projects pose to Indigenous communities in the surrounding areas and Indigenous women specifically. When mining projects enter a region, they bring large groups of workers from outside of the local community into man camps, which significantly increases danger to Indigenous women in the community. Indigenous Australians take on massive coal mine for the Wangan and Chiglanu. Their land and waters embody their culture and spirit. Today, their ancestral homelands are threatened with destruction by the development of up to 6 massive coal mines. One of these mines, the Carmichael coal mine, would be among the largest in the world, producing up to 60 million tons of coal per year for up to 60 years. There also has been coal mining projects along with other mining projects that had threatened Alaska's salmon, and these projects may be no more. Bristol Bay is home to the largest commercial stock-eyed salmon fishery in the world, estimated to provide half the global food supply of stock-eyed salmon. Additionally, as the homeland of the Indigenous peoples, it is also an important source for traditional subsistence food source for Native people. One of the more horrific cases was the lynching of Jesse Washington. Jesse Washington was a 17-year-old African-American farmhand who was lynched in the county seat of Waco, Texas on May 15, 1916, in what would become a well-known case example of racist lynching. Washington was convicted of raping and murdering Lucy Fryer, the wife of his white employer, in rural Robertson, Texas. He was chained by his neck and dragged out of the county court by observers. He was then paraded through the street, all while being stabbed and beaten. Before being held down and castrated, he was then lynched in front of Waco City Hall. Over 10,000 spectators, including city officials and police departments, gathered to watch the attack. There was a celebratory atmosphere among whites at the spectacle of the murder, and many children attended during their lunch hour. Members of the mob cut off his fingers and hung him over a bonfire after saturating him with coal oil. He was repeatedly lowered and raised over the fire for about 2 hours. After the fire was extinguished, his charred torso was dragged through the town. A professional photographer took pictures as the event unfolded, providing rare imagery of a lynching in progress. The pictures were printed and sold as postcards in Waco. A recipe for murder: the killing of Shirley Gibbs Russell. I don't support U.S. imperialism, obviously, but I just wanted to cover the story because it involves coal. The Marine captain vanished without a trace, but her jealous husband left behind a trail that would convict him eventually. It was 1989, and Shirley, however, when she disappeared and her husband claimed she had walked away from it all, it would take the trail of breadcrumbs he had left himself to bring him to justice and make legal history. Shirley Gibbs Russell had met Robert Peter Russell in 1985 after they were both stationed at a Marine Corps base in South Carolina. Unfortunately, things were not going nearly as well in terms of their relationship and marriage. Shirley and Robert had married in 1987 after he divorced his first wife, but he continued to have affairs with other women, and accounts suggest to be abusive to Shirley. He is said to also be an alcoholic. Russell reportedly spied on her, accused her of being unfaithful, hit her at least once, and made racist remarks towards her, prompting Shirley to seek marriage counseling repeatedly, and by 1988, Shirley appeared to have enough of this whole marriage. Russell was discharged for unauthorized absence, using the phones without permission, and fraud. The day before her disappearance, she picked up the final version of the marital settlement agreement and put down a down payment on a apartment to live in, or like a complex to live in. Robert was charged with Shirley's murder after her disappearance. Prosecutors contended that he shot her to death with a .25 caliber pistol while they were in the storage shed next to the quarters, dismembered her body, then dumped the remains in a coal mine shaft in rural Pennsylvania. Robert maintained his innocence at his 1991 trial. The case against him was entirely circumstantial evidence. There was no witnesses, no blood was found in the storage shed, and the supposed murder weapon which Robert purchased days before Shirley's disappearance was never located. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His case was the first federal murder trial in which the victim's body has never been recovered. She has not used her credit cards or bank account since she was last seen, and all the property she placed in storage has remained there. Foul play is highly suspected in her disappearance due to the circumstances involved. This case is actually featured in The Perfect Murder, a made-for-television movie based on Shirley's case. Was aired 8 years after her disappearance, and the case was also featured in the FBI Files TV crime show.